All right, another important component of this week's lab is the classification of organisms. This becomes really important in the follow-up lab to 191, which would be, let me see here, do the math, 192. In 192, you'll be classifying organisms every single week. Let's get a head start and learn the levels of organization. If you don't remember this from a previous class, one way to memorize all this vegetable soup is with a mnemonic. I can go down through kingdom, phylum, class, order, etc. with the mnemonic King Philip crossed over foaming gopher spit. Okay, you may have a favorite mnemonic that's more vulgar than that, but I'll stick with that one for public use. A good example might be the bald eagle, whose genus and species combine to make its scientific name, Haliaeetus leucocephalus. It's in the family Accipitridae, in the order Accipitriformes, class Aves, kingdom Animalia, etc. Okay. And we need to know the difference this week between prokaryotic organisms and eukaryotic organisms. If we break down the word eukaryote into its parts, we get an organism that possesses a true kernel. Okay, how's that for a crazy detail? A true kernel just means that a eukaryotic organism possesses a true nucleus, and prokaryotic organisms are those that came along prior or before eukaryotes, and they do not have a true nucleus. Ah, yes, plant and animal kingdoms. Got it. Okay, 3 domains, 6 kingdoms. You all can read as well as I can through this list here. Okay, overview of the prokaryotes. There are 2 kingdoms in the prokaryotes, the eubacteria and the archaebacteria. Characteristics of the prokaryotes are that they lack a membrane-bound nucleus or organelles. Organelles are small structures within cells that kind of act like our organs. They perform certain functions. And they are always single-celled. The basic structure of a prokaryote is cytoplasm bound by a plasma membrane. Most species will have a rigid cell wall. Cytoplasm is where the DNA is found. It's circular strands of DNA that are not found in a nucleus. A nice diagram here shows you how simple the body plan of a prokaryote is. A single cell with circular DNA wound around inside the cytoplasm. Oftentimes, these will have hair-like filaments on the outside that they use for swimming around and locomotion. This one has a long tail-like flagellum. The kingdom Archaebacteria in the prokaryotes includes some pretty weird organisms. Organisms that often occur in extreme habitats like salt flats, hot springs, or acidic environments, or even environments that lack oxygen. Some examples are methanogens, extreme halophiles, archaebacteria that live in extremely salty water, or thermoacidophiles, organisms, bacteria that live in environments that are extremely hot and acidic, where nothing else can live. The eubacteria includes, not U, but eubacteria includes the cyanobacteria. These, we used to call these blue-green algae. It's the slimy stuff that grows on rocks and in ponds, but it's not really an algae. Once again, they do not have membrane-bound organelles. They are autotrophic. Through photosynthesis, they produce their own food, but they don't have chloroplasts. They do have chlorophyll for producing their own food. And some examples of eubacteria. Let's see here. Oh, generally they're smaller than cyanobacteria, no photosynthesis, and slides that we'll be looking at today or that will be available, we can Characterize bacteria through their shapes. Cocci bacteria are round, bacilli bacteria are rod-shaped, and spirili are not spirals but spirals. Overview of the eukaryotes. 4 kingdoms: plants, animals, protists, and fungi. Characteristics: membrane-bound nucleus and organelles. They can be one-celled or multicellular. And the basic body plan is a nucleus, cytoplasm bound by a plasma membrane, and cytoplasm that contains organelles that also have a membrane around them. We can start by looking at the plant kingdom. Components of the plant kingdom, characteristics of the plant kingdom, include a rigid cell wall that is made of cellulose. That's what keeps plants blocky and square compared to squishy like you and me. A selectively permeable membrane, plasma membrane. Plant cells have a central vacuole, that's an empty space used for storage of photosynthetic products, or turgor, which simply keeps the plant, gives its shape. And that nucleus that contains the DNA, RNA. Components continued: mitochondria, the powerhouse that produces ATP, and plastids. These are organelles used in the synthesis and storage of food. A good diagram of a plant cell, you can automatically look at this and see that it's more complicated than the bacterial type organism we saw a few slides ago. You can see that nucleus bound by the membrane. You can see the rigid cell wall, and in the middle there is a big vacuole, the empty space. Okay. Some plants that we'll be seeing in lab today are Elodea. Keep an eye out for these. Some onion cells and some potato cells. Okay, those should be made available in lab. Overview of the kingdom Animalia. Components or characteristics are that they share many organelles in common with plant cells, but do not have cell walls, right? You are not blocky and square like a plant. Thank goodness you are soft and squishy and can walk around. There is no central vacuole in animal cells. And there are no plastids, there are no chloroplasts, because we are heterotrophic organisms that ingest our own food. Okay? Slides that we can view today from the eukaryotic kingdom include some cheek cells. From the diagram, you can see that the cell here, this animal cell, does have a nucleus bound by membrane. There is an outer membrane around the cell. There's cytoplasm within that membrane that contains different types of organelles. Protists are some pretty cool little organisms. It's a large and diverse kingdom. Large, what do we mean by that? We mean many, many species, and diverse because they have many, many forms. They are generally unicellular, but sometimes there are some protist organisms that are loosely organized into colonies of cells that perform diverse functions. They can be autotrophic, producing their own foods, or heterotrophic, meaning that some of these one-celled organisms are swimming around in the muck and eating each other. And some protists are important because they transmit or carry terrible diseases like malaria and sleeping sickness. If you haven't had malaria, that's a good one to not get. Pretty bad stuff. Today we might be seeing some euglena, and there will be some unknown protists swimming around in an example of pond water. Your job will be to take the pond water, find something swimming around in it, and then try and identify it. One example of a protist that we often have in labs for B191 is the euglena. It has an eye spot that helps it know how much light is shining on it. Because it has chloroplasts. It does do photosynthesis, and it helps to be in an area with more light in order to generate more food. You can also see the nucleolus inside the nucleus, and a long tail-like flagellum for swimming around. They're really fast. You'll have to slow them down in lab if you want to see them. Fungi. What are the characteristics of the kingdom fungi? They do have rigid cell walls made of chitin. They do have central vacuoles. Fungi do have a membrane brown nucleus because they're eukaryotes, right? And they have organelles used for different functions. And they are heterotrophic, meaning they absorb their food. They have to ingest their food from somehow, and they absorb it from the ground or other sources. We won't be looking at fungi today. There are no slides, but maybe in future labs we'll put some of those in there because they're pretty cool, or not.